Welcome everybody to the Heart Coherence Collaborative. We are so excited today to have Lynne McTaggart back with us again. Thank you, Lynne, for being here.
Welcome back.
It's my pleasure to be here with you both. Thank you.
Yeah, the reason we invited Lynne back on because it was definitely one of our favorite interviews, and it was by far one of our audience's favorite interviews. And one of the biggest, takeaways for me that I loved was how altruism and helping others can positively impact your coherence. So if we can start this interview out just by touching on that, and then we're going to dive into so many incredible things today.
Okay, thank you for that question, because that's a wonderful example of where HeartMath's work and my work converge. Because what happens with altruism, and that seems to be the key to not just heart coherence, but also healing. And that's what I see over and over again. I've seen it thousands of times when people get off of themselves, as I put it. Their lives heal when they're part of a Power of Eight group. So it's an amazing, strange, mystical situation that occurs in a Power of Eight group. As soon as you get off of yourself and intend for someone else, your life heals too. And the reason that it does has all to do with a thing called the vagus nerve. This is the longest nerve in the body. It is involved in all the major organs of the body. And it's also centrally involved in our whole sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, whether we go into fight, flight, or freeze, or whether we have rest and digest, and more than that, connection. And that's what happens with a very coherent heart. When you have a lot of heart rate variability, you feel rest, digest, connection. What happens in groups is that also affects that vagus nerve to move away from all of that fight, flight, or freeze stuff and into a feeling of great coherent connection. So that's the power of altruism and the power of groups, is we get away from that selfish obsession about the self, but in the process of it, we heal ourselves.
I love that.
Yeah, I would love to have you just walk us through. Some people are familiar from your last interview, but I would love to just hear your path, because it's so interesting, the journey of your former career to where you are now. So can you just tell people a little bit about that and what you do now?
Okay, sure. Well, I got hijacked. I was minding my own business as an investigative reporter in New York, and I got thoroughly hijacked. I was busting giant baby selling rings. That was my first book, The Baby Brokers, by using hidden tape recorders and cameras and all kinds of things like that. My career path was putting bad guys in jail in my 20s. And I started veering over into writing about and investigating medicine and what works in conventional and alternative medicine. My husband and I created a newsletter, now a magazine, called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And it looked at all of that. And in the course of doing that, I kept coming across these very good studies of spiritual healing and other healing modalities that made me think, wait a minute, this is all about thoughts. It means you're taking the thought and sending it to someone else when you do spiritual healing and making that person better. And that has to undermine everything that we think about how the world works. So in setting out to find out why that works, I came across a lot of frontier scientists who individually had created and discovered a tiny patch of what compounded into a completely new view of the world. So I put that together, and that became my book, The Field. But there was a lot of unfinished business, for me at least, about how far you can take thoughts. And I was also fascinated by the idea of lots of people holding the same thought at the same time. Does that magnify the effect? So I started an experiment called the Intention Experiment, working with prestigious scientists at universities around the world and setting up these experiments. every so often, and inviting my readers from around the world to take part. Now, we've run 40 of them to date, everything from trying to make plants grow faster to healing someone of post-traumatic stress to lowering violence in war-torn areas, 36 of which have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. And I also, in trying to shrink this down to workshops, began putting people into groups of 8 or so and having them send healing intention to someone with a health challenge. And to my astonishment and just almost dismay, because I didn't know what to make of this, people started having amazing healings. I mean, I've seen thousands of healing cases now, 2 people getting up out of their wheelchairs, one of whom was paralyzed from the neck down, and loads of things, reversals of stage 4 cancer, very severe arthritis disappearing, blindness going, hearing returning, so much of that going on. And so that's where I am now in investigating and using Power of 8 groups, not just to heal each other, but also to heal the world.
Mm. Oh, I love that you touched on that, and especially intention, because any of my friends watching, they know one of the things that I'm like so obsessed with that I took away from Joe Dispenza is that if you want to manifest a new life, the quantum equation is a clear intention plus an elevated emotion. So here at the Heart Coherence Collaborative, what we do is we just practice elevating our emotions, and we teach people how to do that. But you are the intention wizard, and you have an intention class out right now. I'd love to kind of learn more what goes on in that class.
Okay, thank you for asking. So there are lots of keys to intention mastery. And to find out what to do, way back when I did my book, The Intention Experiment, I studied intention masters, Qigong masters, master healers, Buddhist monks. I also studied what was working in the laboratory with mind over matter experiments. And so I put them together. And there are in total 13 keys to intention mastery that I teach in level 1 and level 2 of my courses. Level 1, though, has the 7 key essentials to being a very effective intender. And that means the right head space, the right mind state, because a lot of people think intention is meditation. It's nothing like meditation. And I know that because we've demonstrated it in neuroscientific studies. We got a team of neuroscientists and we studied groups of student volunteers doing Power of 8 groups, expecting the outcome to be identical brainwave signatures to meditation, to those of meditation. They were nothing like them. They were much more like, almost identical to brainwave studies done by the University of Pennsylvania on Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer and Sufi masters during chanting. So you need a particular mind state. That's a very focused mind state, which I teach people to do. You need a very focused heart state, which I teach people to do. But one of the real keys is developing a way to be specific. And I give people a lot of instruction in that because even with our intention experiments, we had 4 that didn't work. And those 4 were mostly all about not having a very specific intention statement. We tried that. We tried just sending love to our target, and it didn't work. What works is being very specific. So I've demonstrated that both in our intention experiments and also in my classes and with my thousands of students, is what works is to be very specific. I'll give you an example. People usually say when somebody says, "What do you want?" "I want to be rich." And actually, they don't mean they want to be rich. They don't mean they want lots of stuff and millions in the bank. What they usually actually want is, "I hate my job, I want a new job." Or, "I want more free time, I'm working too hard to be with my children or grandchildren, or to pursue a hobby." It's not necessarily about having more stuff. So I teach people to find out what they really want and then to ask for it. And there are lots of other things, and that key that you talked about is getting off of yourself. That's one of my big mantras. When people are stuck, it is get off of yourself. Start intending for someone else who needs it more, and watch what happens to you. So that is the whole Power of Eight group, the synergy that goes on, which I don't pretend to completely understand. I know why a lot of it works, but there's a mystical element to it of people coming together and doing this altruistically for each other that is extraordinarily healing.
Mm.
Can you talk more about what happens in the brain in these groups when they're studied?
Sure. What happens in the brain is really amazing because, as I say, we expected this team of neuroscientists, which was at Life University, the largest and most prestigious chiropractic university in the world. And by the way, the place that Joe Dispenza went to become a chiropractor. He's a great buddy of mine, by the way. We're both from New Jersey, and we're both Italian. So when we did these studies with a team of neuroscientists at Life University, as I say, we expected it to look like meditation. So that would have meant an increase in alpha brain waves, slowing down the brain, but having more of something. We didn't have that at all. We had a turning off of the brain. We had a lowering of the parts of the brain right back here, the parietal lobes, that help us navigate through space and essentially create our separateness, our sense of separateness. They tell us what's me, what's not me. And those were greatly reduced, dialed way down. So were the parts of the brain, this is the right frontal lobe, that are involved with worry, doubt, negativity. They were also dialed way down. So these were people in a state of ecstatic oneness. And here's the thing, and I think this is the big secret sauce here, because we don't get to experience oneness. We don't get to experience the field. We oftentimes say, how do you, people say to me all the time, how do I enter the field? You don't need to. You are the field. Your subatomic particles help to make up the field. But we don't experience life that way. We experience life in total separation. So this is one place where you do. And the feedback I get from people in Power of Eight groups underscores that all the time. They talk about feeling like they're in a mystical state. They're in a serious altered state. They have all of the hallmarks that Abraham Maslow described when he talked about peak experiences, the famous psychologist Maslow. He talked about feeling, senses, physical changes. And my people talk about goosebumps and feeling great heat or energy, feeling like they have a blinding epiphany of meaning. They feel a great sense of oneness, like it all makes sense suddenly, and other things like that. And that's what my people describe all the time. So I think it is that sense of oneness and other parts besides the ones I've mentioned of the brain dialed down too. But it is really the getting off of the self that is so effective and powerful.
Mm. Oh, I love that you touched on that. And I like that you talked about like this mystical aspect that's underneath it all, that's harder to kind of understand. But like, doesn't it kind of seem that there is some magical thing that created this structure to simply be that when you are moving towards connecting with all things, you heal, and when you are moving towards separating from all things, you like die or start to get sick?
Absolutely. I think this is the state we were meant to be in.
Mm.
In my book, The Bond, I looked at, whether or not Darwin was right. Is it all about survival of the fittest? Were we meant to be competitive individualists? And the overwhelming answer from the science was no. We need connection and belonging almost more than we need food and water. And so I think it's that connection the feeling of connection, particularly in these isolated times, that is so powerful and transformational. And the feeling of oneness, as you say, it's our birthright, but we don't get to feel this. And for us, it does make us feel like we are in a mystical state because that is probably where we're supposed to be some of the time. We're supposed to feel that sense of change and connection that we just don't get in our lives, in our competitive, individualistic lives.
Mm.
It's reminding me when you were talking about the brain of how I've heard psychedelics described as if it's more of what it's turning off than what it's turning on. Have you looked at the research of psychedelics, and is there some connection of a similar state?
I haven't looked at the research on psychedelics because, in my own view, you don't need it.
Mm.
Why take that when you can just get a group of 8 and you'll experience exactly the same? You know, so people do have altered states. I have many people talk about light beings being behind their chairs when they're in a Power of 8 group. And
Wow.
one person said it was like they were the magnifiers and they were sending their energy through us. Now, I've heard that numerous times. I don't know what to make of that. Do we have aliens that get called down when we're doing Power of 8 groups? I don't know. But there is this extraordinary state that keeps getting repeated and repeated. I survey people whenever they do an intention experiment with me. I want to find out what the participants experienced. And I get this over and over and over again. I felt like I was in the tractor beam in Star Trek, said one person. And people cry uncontrollably. We get these amazing experiences all the time.
So say there was somebody out there that's listening to this right now and they're understanding what you're saying and they're believing you, but they feel so far away from it because they're stuck in self. Because I know I've experienced both sides of this I guess this chart you could say where I've been so stuck in self and it hurts so much. And then I've been so connected and it feels so amazing. But when you're so alone, you feel so far. So do you have any mantras or any advice to like pray for the strength to connect?
Well, all I would recommend is give the Power of 8 a try.
Hmm.
If you join one of my courses, we put you in touch with Power of 8 groups. We even have something called the 8 Revolution, which is on my community site now, which is connecting Power of 8 groups together and creating Power of 8 groups among people who need them. So we put people in groups or have them get access to groups. And as I say, all of my courses, but try it. You know, during lockdown, I had one of my students, a guy called Jerry. Remember, it's during lockdown. We're all isolated. He lives alone. And he said at the end of a year-long course with me, he said, I've felt more love than I've ever felt in my life. I now know what love is because he was meeting every week with his group. And most of my groups, because they're coming out of classes or whatever, meet virtually. They meet on Zoom every week, but that connection grows deeper and deeper and deeper. So you don't have to believe when you start. Many of my people are skeptical when they start, and then they suddenly get the experience of it. You know, I'm just writing today about a woman called Louise who said, there is a real mystical component to this. I don't completely understand, but when I'm doing intention for someone else, I really do feel like I'm in an altered state. And the same thing when they're doing it for me. So my antidote to loneliness is just give it a try. And as I mentioned, in my uh, website, lynnmctaggart.com, I have a section called Free Tools. And what I decided is looking at the state of the world right now with, banking crisis again, climate change crises again, cost of living crises again, leaders that are more and more hopeless in solving the major problems of our days, no matter where you are in the world. So I thought to myself, we need an army of change makers. And then I realized we've got an army of change makers. I have tens of thousands of Power of 8 groups around the world. What if I brought them together? And so that's what we're doing. So I've set up this thing called the 8 Revolution so that groups of 8 or so can meet privately on my website, no cost, and communicate with each other and share information about making social change via intention. And what I've done is I provide those groups with free tools. Every fortnight, every 2 weeks, I send another free tool so that the groups can use this and start using all of these tools to start making changes in their communities together. And that's what it's going to need to take. It needs a small group because big change doesn't ever happen from the top down. If you look at all the major big changes in the world, the big revolutions, and I'm not talking political revolution, I'm talking about a social revolution, like Martin Luther King and civil rights. That was a small group. Gandhi liberating India from Britain started with a small group. And so did Czechoslovakia, left the Soviet Union without a shot being fired. That was a small group that started it. And so it's really just empowering them and showing them how to create a sense of unity and connection in their communities. And you don't have to give up the day job. There are little things you can do that make huge changes.
Mm. Can you talk about some of the groups you've brought together with really diverse people and what happened? I know there's a couple of experiments you did with people that are on the opposite sides of the spectrum having a common intention.
Absolutely. So we did one amazing experiment for Israel, Jerusalem in particular, because it was experiencing a lot of violence. And as I said, we've done 10 peace intention experiments to date. So I had special equipment I could use. I was in a studio that enabled me to put cameras in 9 different locations. So we put a camera in a conference room in 8 different Arab cities with Arabs from Kuwait and Jordan and Oman and Saudi Arabia, etc. The 9th camera was in an audience of Israeli Jews. So we had Jews and Arabs. Now I had to broker this connection because neither side wanted to talk to the other. So we did. And this equipment was so brilliant because it enabled me to speak to them all, and they could speak individually to me and to each other. So I could call on the different rooms to say, how was that for you? And as I said, these people they refused to speak to each other before. And afterward, they started sending love to each other. They were saying, you're our brothers and sisters. Your God is our God. We love you, sisters. We love you, brothers. And it was just, everybody was crying. It was just amazing. And we saw the same when I did one for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I had Arabs and Americans do that intention. And again, there was a love fest in the social media afterward on my Facebook page with both sides saying just the same.
Wow. I love that. And it made me think about, one thing I saw early on in my heart math education was a thing called constructive interference, where if one person's heart wave comes together with another person's heart wave, it like exponentially increases the size of that wave. So I was wondering if any studies have been done in regards to intention. Is intention energy brain energy? And is it amplified when coming together with someone else's intention energy?
It is body energy. So there's been a very interesting study called it was nicknamed the Love Study, that was done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And they had a study of people where one partner of the couple had cancer. So they put one by one the couples together and did studies on them. And they put the one with cancer in one room with a camera on them. And they hooked this person up to all kinds of equipment measuring their heartbeat, their brain waves, all of that stuff, heart variability, et cetera, et cetera. The other partner, the well partner, was in another room in another building and also hooked up to the same equipment, but had a monitor which would flash images of his or her partner every so often. And that was the signal for him to send, or her, to send loving, healing intention to his or her partner. Here's what happened. After they looked at the evidence on both for their physiological responses, they found that whenever the well partner was sending intention, their brain waves started synchronizing. Their heart waves started synchronizing. Their skin conductance started synchronizing. You know, the rate of blood flow to the extremities, breathing started synchronizing, et cetera, et cetera. These were people who were in a state of total entrainment, as physicists call it, so that everything was operating in sync. So yes, intention has an extraordinary effect on the body, and that has a lot to do with some of the effects that we see. Think of two pendulums. You know, it takes about 16 seconds for little metronomes that are going like in opposite directions to start exchanging energy enough to do this. And that is really what you see with intention. You see people suddenly being able to operate in total synchrony.
Wow, that just gave me the craziest goosebumps.
I love that one. I would love to hear about working with the past. So healing your past, retro intention, that interests us both so much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we started doing retro intention. I started doing it some years ago. And the reason I did it was because I had studied what physicists think about time. No good quantum physicist believes there's such a thing as sequential time. Carlo Rovelli says there's no such thing as time, the famous physicist from Italy. Also, there's no place in the brain that understands sequential time. We make that up, essentially. Time, according to quantum physicists, is one big smeared out now. And also, it's so interesting when people suffer from amnesia, not only can they not remember the past, they cannot imagine the future. In the brain, it's all mixed up as one big now. So if you can't remember the past, you cannot figure out, you cannot see in front of you again. So I started thinking about all of this and said, well, essentially, and my husband, Brian Hubbard, who has written a book called The Untrue Story of You, about the idea that the past sits on us like an unwanted guest, has described time as an energy. And so I started thinking, well, if it's an energy, then we can just change that energy. We don't have to change what happened. We change the energy around it. So I use a bunch of techniques to do that and to get people to essentially reclaim the power that they have lost in past hurts, past traumas. So I work a lot with that, and that's what we're doing. And I do it with my husband, Brian, who teaches his work, which he calls time light. Becoming time light, and which he developed and used to get over his own deep depression he had for some years after having a verbally abusive father. So he healed himself through it, and now we have combined forces to put this together, and we teach it at retreats. We have a retreat coming up in September 4th in Broughton Hall in Yorkshire, which was, you'll love this, the runner-up location for Downton Abbey.
Oh.
So the people who come to our retreat stay in this 16th century stately mansion. And the owners are also very spiritually minded. So they've built this wonderful meeting place sanctuary, a beautiful spa there. It's 3,000 acres, a wonderful outdoor fire pit, labyrinth, all of these spiritual elements to it as well. So we combine all of that to this magical week. And it's also the place that houses the Pear Research Project equipment, which now works again. So people who come to our retreats, if they're really interested in mind over matter experiments and those famous Princeton experiments, they can play with the equipment too.
Wow.
So yeah, so we work on the past, and I've had many people from our course last year write and tell me what happened. Now, I just spoke to a woman yesterday, Zoe, who is part of it. Zoe had a really abusive husband. He pulled her down the stairs. He hit her. He did all kinds of awful, violent things to her. So she finally got the energy to get away, and she thought she had dealt with it. So she came to our retreat, not necessarily thinking about dealing with that anymore. And he had passed on anyway. So she comes to the retreat, and during some of our sessions, and we do all kinds of things with role play and retro intention, et cetera, she suddenly got this amazing light bulb moment and realized I haven't dealt with everything because I didn't deal with my own responsibility in this. And I also never stopped to think why he did what he did. And maybe he was the hurt child too. And so that heavy weight has lifted. And we had other people who had very bad relationships with their parents. We had another woman whose father was not too well, and she dreaded the time he was going to pass because she'd had a horrendous childhood, and she thought she was going to have, it was going to bring it up all over again. But by the end of the retreat, she was able to let go all of that and essentially wish him well when he died on his next journey. So what we do is lift the weight of the past, and we do it with retro intention.
Wow. Yeah, so I got to be honest, I've been sitting here still like just blown away thinking about two people harmonizing entirely their entire systems. How you were saying the people in opposite rooms literally harmonize their entire body's energy. That is new to me and kind of mind blowing. So, say I was in, in the other room and Leah was in this room. What would it take for us to do that? Is it just the intention?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can't believe, because we have grown up with such a materialistic view of the world. We
Yeah.
cannot believe that a thought has that much power. But think about my intention experiments. And I love to describe one of my early intention experiments where I was in front of a group of people, about 700 people in Sydney, Australia. And I had set up an experiment with the University of Arizona, the Consciousness Research Laboratory run by Dr. Gary Schwartz, the noted psychologist. So we had set up 4 sets of seeds, and he'd taken photos and had his lab take photos of these sets of seeds and sent them to me labeled A, B, C, D. Unbeknownst to the scientists, me and the audience in Sydney, Australia, chose one of those sets of seeds, sent intention to it. Now, the scientists knew we were doing it, but not which ones. After we were done, I told the scientists we were done, didn't tell them which seeds it was. That was their cue to plant the seeds and then measure them 5 days later. And it's only after they finished doing that that I unblinded the study and said, oh yeah, it was seeds A. Now, what we discovered is the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. So think about this for a second. We are in Sydney, Australia. The seeds are in Tucson, Arizona. If you head toward via California from Sydney to Tucson, it's 8,000 miles away.
Mm.
And also, we were doing an intention not to the thing itself, but to a representative thing of the of it, you know, a representation of the actual thing. So we were sending intention to a symbolic representation, a photo of the seeds, and yet we had an effect. 8,000 miles away on a set of seeds. It did it 5 more times. We did it every single time. The seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. We did it in different locations with different size audiences, including an audience of mine over the internet. So everybody was scattered around the globe, sent intention to the seeds, had a significant effect. That's how powerful your thoughts are. We can't get our minds around that. We
I'm
can't believe
crying.
that. We're still thinking that they're stuck inside our heads, but they're not stuck inside our heads at all. And you are beaming. We are all beaming 24/7. We've got 70,000 thoughts a day, and about 20% of them are positive. Usually about 80% of most people's thoughts are pretty negative and judgmental and, all of those things. So that's what we're beaming out all the time. And yeah, we do have an effect.
Better send me some good thoughts.
Yeah. Every time you come on, I just get this reminder of how truly magical life is. It's like, oh, the best conversations ever.
It's so good. We love this kind of stuff.
Yeah. How else can we our supporters follow you and support you and everything that you're doing?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I've got my level 1 class, Intention Essentials, coming up. That's a virtual class in June. It starts June 24th. And there's a 6-session course, including live and interactive stuff with me. So please check that out on lynnmctaggart.com. We've got our Broughton Heal Your Past retreat at Broughton Hall in Yorkshire. Come stay and pretend you're part of Downton Abbey, as well as getting your past healed. And that's kicking off on September 4th. And there is also the 8 Revolution. Want to use your thoughts and lots of other things to revolutionize your neighborhood, recreate a connected, loving community. Well, join that. And it's full of free tools that you can join with a Power of 8 group. Get hold of a Power of 8 group yourself. So there's loads of that and much more on my website, lynnmctaggart.com.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your work and all the good intentions you put into the world through all these groups of people and all the free resources that you offer.
Yeah, it's time for us to join one of these Intention of 8 groups because it sounds too good to be true.
Yeah.
We're ready.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Lynne.
We're sending love to everybody.